Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. England, 1919. Not long after the Great War ended. Life is slowly getting back to normal.
Right, a very specific atmosphere.
And in the quiet Leicestershire countryside, a young woman, Bella Wright, she's out cycling one summer evening. Witnesses see her with a man also on a bike, a green one.
Mm.
Hours later, she's found dead, beside her bicycle on that same country road. A single bullet wound. And the question just hangs there. Was it the man she was with?
And if it was, why did he behave so,
Yeah.
so strangely afterwards?
Yeah.
It's a scene straight out of a classic mystery novel, isn't it?
Absolutely. That pastoral setting, the sudden violence, and the immediate focus on that last known companion.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what we're unpacking today. We've gone deep into the sources covering the green bicycle case. It's really one of the most perplexing unsolved murders in British history.
It truly is.
Our goal in this deep dive is to pull out the key facts, understand the twists of the investigation, the trial, and really zero in on the most puzzling element, the psychology of the prime suspect, Ronald Light.
Why did he do the things he did? Regardless of guilt or innocence.
Exactly. What can his actions tell us? And why are we still so fascinated by this case, over a century later?
It's one of those cases where the factual trail seems clear up to a point, but then Light's behavior, the human element, it just throws in all this ambiguity.
Okay, let's set the scene properly then. Summer 1919, Leicestershire countryside, pretty peaceful. Our victim is Bella Wright. She's 21, works in a factory, just a young woman living her life.
Right. And on the evening of July 5th, she's cycling along Gartree Road. Several witnesses, they later come forward, they say they saw her with a man also on a bike.
And that man is later identified as Ronald Light.
Yes. Then later that same evening, her uncle, George Measures, he's the one who finds her, dead, right there on Gartree Road near Little Stretton, next to their bike.
And interestingly, murder wasn't the first thought.
No, not at all. Initially, it was considered maybe an accident, a really bad fall, perhaps.
But that didn't last long, did it?
No, it definitely didn't. A doctor examined her body and found a single bullet wound just below her left breast. And crucially, a .455 caliber lead bullet was recovered from her body. And just like that, a possible accident becomes a definite murder investigation.
So the focus shifts dramatically. Find the man she was seen with, anyone else who might have been around. But it wasn't an immediate breakthrough, was it? Things went quiet for a bit.
They did, yeah. Quite a few months, actually. It wasn't until February 1920 that there was a major development.
What happened?
Well, parts of a bicycle frame, a green bicycle frame, were dredged up from the River Soar or the Grand Union Canal near Leicester.
A green bicycle, the same color witnesses mentioned.
Exactly. And get this, the identifying serial numbers on the frame had been deliberately filed off.
Wow, okay, that's blatant.
And found with the bicycle parts, a .455 caliber revolver holster containing live ammunition.
The same caliber as the bullet that killed Bella.
Precisely. Bike parts matching the description, numbers filed off, and a holster for the right caliber weapon, all found together, dumped in a canal. It looks incredibly incriminating.
It absolutely does. So how did they connect it to Light?
The sources tell us the green bicycle itself was traced back to Ronald Light. Apparently, it was quite a distinctive model. He'd bought it secondhand. So the police located him and brought him in for questioning.
And who exactly was Ronald Light? What was his background?
He was 34 at the time, a mathematics teacher. He also had military experience. He'd been a Royal Engineer during the war. So on the surface, a respectable man.
Okay, so they have this evidence from the canal. They've traced the bike to Light. They know who he is. And this is where his behavior really becomes the absolute core puzzle of the case, right?
It's the crux of everything.
Yeah.
Because when the police first questioned Light, and remember, this was before they found the bike parts in the canal, he flat out denied even knowing Bella Wright. Said he'd never met her.
A complete denial, no contact whatsoever.
None.
But then they find the bike in the holster. How did he react when they confronted him with that evidence?
His story just flips completely. Now, he admits meeting Bella that evening, July 5th. He says, yes, they cycled together for a bit, had a pleasant chat, a brief acquaintance.
And crucially,
He claimed they parted company while she was still alive and well.
wow, okay. From never met her to, yes, we cycled together and chatted, but she was fine when I left. That's a huge shift.
Massive.
So what reason did he give for taking his bike apart, filing off the numbers and chucking it, along with a revolver holster, into a canal? That's not normal behavior.
His explanation was pure, overwhelming panic. That's what he claimed. He said he heard about Bella's death soon after, and he just became terrified. Terrified of being wrongly implicated because he was the last person seen with her.
So in a moment of panic, he destroys potential evidence.
That was his story. He disposed of it all because he feared being framed.
And the actual murder weapon, the .455 revolver, was that ever found?
No, the gun itself was never recovered. Now, it was known Light had owned a .455 revolver during his military service.
Right.
But his claim was that he didn't own one at the time of the murder. He said he lost it or thrown it away sometime before July 5th, conveniently.
So let's recap this. We have the initial lie, denying he ever met her. Then the admission after the physical evidence turns up, the incredibly suspicious disposal of the bike and the holster for the right caliber, and the disappearance of his own similar revolver. It's this whole cluster of inconsistencies and actions that the sources really point to as his profoundly strange behavior.
Yeah, it really leaves you scrambling, trying to figure out the motivation. Was that first denial a calculated lie? Was throwing the bike away a guilty man covering his tracks?
Or was it really just an innocent man completely losing his head in fear?
Exactly. And all of this leads inevitably to the trial of Ronald Light,
Which took place when?
May 1920 at Leicester Castle. And it became a sensation, partly because of who was defending him.
Yes, the legendary barrister, Sir Edward Marshall Hall. So, what was the prosecution's case actually built on? It sounds mostly circumstantial.
It was almost entirely circumstantial, but, pretty powerful stuff. They had the witnesses placing Light with Bella shortly before she died. They had his green bicycle disposed of very suspiciously.
And the holster found with it?
Right, the holster for the murder weapons caliber. And maybe most damningly, they pointed to his initial lies and his changing story as clear signs of guilt. Consciousness of guilt, they'd call it.
Did the prosecution offer a motive?
The main theory they pushed was a spurned sexual advance. The idea that maybe Light made a pass at Bella, she rejected him, and he reacted violently, either in rage or perhaps even an accidental shot during some kind of struggle.
Okay, so strong circumstantial evidence, a suggested motive. How did Marshall Hall possibly counter all that?
Well, Marshall Hall was brilliant at creating reasonable doubt. That was his whole strategy. He couldn't deny Light was with Bella. Obviously, the evidence proved that.
Yeah.
But he hammered home the fact there was zero direct evidence. No eyewitness saw Light shoot her. Nobody found the actual gun.
So he started introducing alternative possibilities.
Exactly. He floated the idea that maybe Bella was hit by a stray bullet, a ricochet perhaps, maybe from a poacher nearby. It sounds a bit unlikely, but it plants a seed of doubt.
Or
maybe she was killed by someone else entirely. An unknown third party who encountered her after she and Light had parted company, just like Light claimed.
Okay, but what about Light's really suspicious behavior? The lies, dumping the bike and holster, that still looks bad.
But this is where Marshall Hall's psychological defense was so clever. He didn't try to excuse the actions, but reframed them. He painted Light not as a killer, but as this respectable man, a schoolmaster, an ex-officer who, despite being innocent, just completely panicked.
Panicked because he was scared of being wrongly accused.
Precisely. He argued that the sheer terror of being the last person seen with a murder victim could make an ordinary, innocent person do incredibly stupid, self-incriminating things, like lying to the police and throwing away evidence.
So he turned the suspicious behavior into evidence of fear, not guilt.
Exactly. His skill was making that narrative of panicked innocence seem plausible enough to create that crucial, reasonable doubt.
The sources also mentioned something specific about the bullet, didn't they? A detail the defense used.
Yeah, it was an old type of bullet, lead, unjacketed. Marshall Hall argued this wasn't necessarily standard military issue for a .455 at that exact moment, trying to weaken the link to Light's known service revolver.
Although the prosecution countered that.
Oh yeah, the prosecution said that kind of ammo was still easily available. It's just another small point Marshall Hall used to muddy the waters, chip away at the certainty.
And in the end, this defense strategy, focusing on doubt and the psychology of panic, it worked.
It did. Which brings us right back to analyzing Ronald Light's psychology based on everything the sources tell us. We really have to confront that strange behavior, those inconsistent statements.
Okay, let's break it down. First, that huge shift. Denying he knew her, then admitting they were together. What's the psychology there? Was the initial denial a cold, calculated lie to just erase himself from the picture?
Or was it perhaps just an immediate, almost instinctive reaction? Shock, fear, the second the police asked him about a murdered girl he was just cycling with.
And then the disposal of the evidence, the bike, the holster. Was that the act of a guilty man methodically covering his tracks like the prosecution believed?
Or could it genuinely be what the defense claimed? an irrational self-destructive act driven purely by overwhelming panic, the fear of being framed making him act in the worst possible way. How do you weigh those possibilities?
It's tough. Now, we've considered the possibility he was guilty. What might have driven him to kill Bella? The sources suggest a few scenarios.
Well, the spurned advance theory is the one most often cited by the prosecution. Could simple rejection, a no, really trigger that level of impulsive violence in someone? It happens, sadly.
Or maybe it wasn't sexual. Maybe it was just rage. An argument about something completely different that just escalated terribly.
That's possible, too. Or there's the accident and cover-up idea, which some sources lean towards as plausible.
What if the gun just went off? Maybe he was showing it to her. Maybe there was a struggle. Maybe he just mishandled it. An accident.
And then, faced with that horror, his entire focus shifts to hiding it. The disposal of the bike, the holster, the lies, all desperate attempts to conceal a terrible accident, not premeditated murder. It's a theory that could potentially explain both the death and the bizarre aftermath.
But then there's the flip side, the innocent man theory that won him the acquittal. If he was innocent, why such extreme panic? It seems disproportionate.
This forces us to really think about the psychological pressure of being under suspicion, doesn't it? Could the absolute terror of being the last person seen with Bella, knowing he owned a similar gun, genuinely push a seemingly normal, respectable person over the edge?
To the point of lying to police and destroying crucial evidence, even though it makes him look guilty.
That's what the defense successfully argued. That this level of fear, this panic, it's a real psychological state. And it can make people act in utterly counterintuitive, self-destructive ways that mimic guilt.
And you can just picture the psychological battle playing out in the courtroom at Leicester Castle. Prosecution, he's lying, his actions prove guilt. Defense, no, he's terrified, his actions prove panic.
Exactly. Competing psychological profiles.
Yeah.
And Marshall Hall was a master at making the panicked innocent profile resonate with the jury, enough to overcome that pile of circumstantial evidence.
Which leads us to the verdict.
Ronald Light was acquitted, found not guilty by the jury. And apparently the deliberation was very short.
But the acquittal was controversial right from the start.
Hugely controversial, and it remains so. Many people then, and many looking back now through the sources, firmly believed he was guilty and, well, got away with murder.
What happened to Light afterwards? Did he just go back to his life?
Not really. The sources indicate he left Leicestershire pretty quickly. He changed his name, lived a very quiet, private life afterwards.
Did he ever talk about it again?
Apparently not publicly. He reportedly never spoke about the case again before he died in 1975.
So, officially, the green bicycle case remains unsolved. Which leaves us with all these unanswered questions, doesn't it? If Light was guilty, what was the precise trigger? Spurned advance. Rage. That accident scenario.
We just don't know for sure. And if he was innocent? Well, then who did kill Bella Wright, and why? The sources don't point to any other credible suspects who were ever really investigated. It's a blank.
And it also makes you wonder about the trial itself. How much did things like Light's respectable background or Marshall Hall's renowned courtroom skill influence that jury, despite all the suspicious circumstances?
It's a perfect case study in the psychology of an unsolved mystery, really. Because there's no definitive answer, we're forced to keep looking at the evidence, especially Light's actions, through different lenses.
Yeah, the doubt just lingers. All the what-ifs, the shadow over Light's entire life.
And it really highlights the limitations of circumstantial evidence, doesn't it? And that crucial legal principle, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. What does that actually mean when the evidence is strong but not absolute?
So looking back at this deep dive through the sources, that initial scene, the weird evidence from the canal, Light's contradictory stories, the brilliant defense, the controversial acquittal, it really makes you think about human behavior under extreme pressure.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
You have these strong circumstantial threads pointing one way, but then this deeply puzzling behavior and these competing psychological explanations offered at trial. It all adds up to a story that stays with you precisely because it's unresolved.
We've explored the green bicycle case using the sources to understand the facts and really grapple with that central psychological puzzle. Ronald Light. Why did he act the way he did? Bella Wright's murder remains officially unsolved. And it leaves us wondering, when you have strong circumstantial evidence and someone's behavior is undeniably strange, inconsistent, how do you really tell the difference between innocent panic and guilty concealment? What does it truly mean to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt when the truth might still be hidden out there on a lonely country lane more than a century later?